I'm the executive director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is a nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're so glad to have all of you with us, and some of you are already in the chat, which is awesome. To welcome Leah Myers in conversation with Kung Lee Sun for a discussion of Thinning Blood, a memoir of family, myth, and identity. It's a vibrant new hers is a vibrant new voice that blends Native folklore and the search for identity in a fierce debut work of personal history. So I'm going to introduce Leah first. Leah Myers received an MFA in creative nonfiction from the University of New Orleans, where she won the Samuel Mockbee Award for Nonfiction 2 years in a row. She now lives in Alabama with roots in Georgia, Arizona, and Washington. And Kung Lee Sun, who uses she, he, and they pronouns, is a lifelong Southerner currently based on the Gulf Coast. As a public interest attorney in Atlanta, she brought class action lawsuits on behalf of people in prisons and jails. He left lawyering to support undocumented and abolitionist organizers as a strategist and trainer, and to write. And Begin the World Over, which Charis also had the honor of celebrating, is their first book. So you can go back on Charis's YouTube and watch Begin the World Over if you want to know more. And there's some interesting parallels and overlapping themes in Kung Lee's book and in your book, even though Kung Lee's book is fiction. And so that's why I wanted to, one of my great joys as a bookseller and event host is getting to be matchmaker for people who don't know each other, but people who I want to see in conversation. So I'm delighted to have this work out and to get to hear y'all. And I'm delighted to have all of y'all with us from around the world watching. Feel free at any point to put your questions in the chat. You can also click the little question tab on the right-hand side and put your questions there. And Kung Lee will work them into the conversation as it makes sense. But otherwise, please just kick back and enjoy what I know is going to be a beautiful conversation. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being with us.
Wonderful. Thank you, ER. Hello, Leah.
Hi.
I feel like I know so much about you because you wrote a memoir and have revealed so much. And thank you. This is a beautiful book. This is just
thank you.
I can't wait for people to get to read this. But I was thinking maybe to start us off, if you could just come on, let us into it with just the first, paragraph or two of what you've written.
Sure, absolutely. So this is the first couple paragraphs of the introduction, which is titled A Lineage. No one taught me to be Native American. My mother taught me that I was, but she did not have the context for what that heritage meant. My grandmother mentioned it very little, even though it was visible in her features. Yet from my earliest memories, being Native has always been an integral part of my identity. Even though I was raised far from my tribe, far from any tribe, I heard the drumbeat of our traditions in my heart. My name is Leah Myers. I am the last member of the Jamestown S'Klallam Tribe in my family line. My family has always called me the record keeper. I collect the stories of those who came before me, of all my family members. I have suitcases and shoeboxes full of photos and notebooks full of stories. I aim to make memories tangible, physical, so that they are harder to forget.
That's awesome. The physical of this, I'm just like,
I did it. The goal.
And the official release was yesterday or today?
It was yesterday.
Yesterday.
Yep.
And an hour after it was released, something fantastic happened.
Yes, the New York Times released their review of it. The same day I found it, and I was shortly before people started sending it to me, and I was bewildered, and it was wonderful. It was a dream come true.
Congratulations! I mean, that is just, it's amazing. I read the review. It is just spot on. It's just like, this is a beautiful piece. It is like you write in this way that is so spare and also so full. And it seems to me that the New York Times really just, that reviewer captured like the sort of essence of that, of the experience of reading the book. So 2 questions about that. One is just, what are you doing to celebrate?
Oh yeah, so my husband and I went out to dinner that night. I was just like, I want to just go out and celebrate and be able to be just enjoy the moment. And then uh I definitely have that review just saved on my phone as well, because it's just as I got to see my name in the New York Times, and that's something I never even considered a possibility, when this whole journey started.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And then was there some part, what part of the review, like when you were reading the review, and there's just like, yes. And was there a part of it that you thought they really, that they nailed it, right? That you were like, oh, they saw me in here.
I think that the all of it, like as you said, they really captured the spirit of what I was hoping people would take away from it. But they called they called the book a finely crafted totem pole of a memoir, and that just made my heart flutter. Even saying it now just makes me so happy, because that's what this is for me. This is my family story. This is my memories. It is that totem pole that I mentioned in the book, wanting to put into people's minds. And for somebody to say it that way just made me really, it was wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. And if for folks who haven't read it yet, since it just came out, maybe just describe what they mean by a finely crafted totem pole, like how you structured.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The sections of the book are titled after the matriarchs in my family, the lineage. So my great grandmother these are all totems that I have chosen or helped, in the case of my mother, helped find because of the disconnection from culture that's had to happen. But my great grandmother was bare, protective and strong, and there's a section about history. My grandmother is Salmon, which is this idea of defiance and swimming upriver, and also abundance. And that section is a lot about being sort of between two worlds, because she was the first generation that was half Native and half Russian immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
And then my mother is Hummingbird, very spiritual, and this idea of like floating. And then myself as Raven is the final section, and looks a lot to the future.
Yeah. How did you you said you chose the totems, or with your mother you helped find? What was the process there?
I think that a totem is a very special thing. I think that spiritual connection is very important. And so I went over the stories of what I knew from my great grandmother, because I never had the chance to meet her in person. And every story that I have ever heard from her talked about this idea of like fierceness and protectiveness, and also just a love of family that was harsh sometimes in the way that it had to be, but it was always very present. And then so that was, choosing that was one of those that was probably the most nebulous, because it was somebody that I only knew from stories. And then my grandmother, as I learned her history and all the things that she faced that she never really talked about to me, I learned from my mother and the people around her. And so that the idea of swimming upriver, and this idea of chasing a life for your next generation, and trying to find your place.
Yeah.
That all speaks to Salmon and the legend of Salmon, I think. And then my mother, we went through a lot of animals, because I was able to have that conversation with her. I told her, if it started as easy questions of like, well, what do you feel the most connected to? What do you think represents you as far as ideas? And I remember when we had like a really deep conversation about it, I mentioned Hummingbird, and I just saw her face sort of light up. And she said that was always been her favorite bird. And it was always this idea of like, oh, that's something that she's always been connected to in a way. It was just waiting to be sort of uncovered.
Oh, so interesting. So you were able to talk to your mom directly about it and like see the recognition in it. Your grandmother, who is Salmon,
yes,
and her name is Vivian.
Vivian, yes, that was right.
Right. She passed last year.
She did.
And what was your relationship? Were you able to talk to her about Salmon directly, or like what was the?
I was not, because it was a lot of the times when Native history got brought up, to me, she was always talking about the stories, but never her own experience. And it would, it would often get sort of circumvented or diverted from. And so I wasn't really able to, and I found out from some other relatives too, that she spent a lot of time in this space of thinking that our culture and this idea of like totems and spirits made us look foolish. And so she had a hard time, I think, coming to terms with that. And I never wanted to make her uncomfortable with trying to help her navigate that. That was not something, unfortunately, I don't think that was something I would have been able to do.
Yeah, that's hard. That is tough. Yeah. It's a question about lineage and heritage and can we talk about that just a little bit?
Absolutely.
Just this giant question of lineage. Because you titled your first sort of intro lineage. And just what you mean by that.
Yeah, I was fascinated with the idea, and this is, of how my lineage exists. It is always passed from the mother, like that is and so the idea of seeing that line become connected to each person was really fascinating to me. And also that's one of the major requirements for becoming a tribal member as well, is the blood quantum, but also to enroll, you have to be able to trace your lineage back to a full-blooded member. And so lineage is something I think about a lot. I think about the idea of where our family trees and these rivers sort of flow to.
Flow from, flow to.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, maybe we should back up a little bit. And for folks who just, for folks for whom the concept of blood quantum is new, if you could just describe what that is.
Sure. So blood quantum is a practice which some tribes use to determine tribal enrollment. And each tribe has different levels that they would require. For my tribe, for the Jamestown S'Klallam, it's 1/8. So I had 1/8 of your blood, and is the idea, must be a Jamestown S'Klallam. So for me, it is a great grandparent. Has to, at least that much has to be Jamestown S'Klallam, or you're not going to be able to enroll as a tribal member.
Yeah, and you have some complicated feelings about that you talk about in the book about this blood quantum.
I have a lot of complicated feelings about that. And it's something, blood quantum is something I've had to, I think, unlearn. I think that's something, because it's interesting, because for others, it was always very easy to see that culture is not related to blood. Like they sometimes correlate, but it doesn't have to, like the idea of somebody, like if I had a child and they were 1/16, but I still taught them everything about the culture, that doesn't, that dictation of whether or not they could be a member is frustrating. But it's also, that was the only proof I had for a long time that I was Native, was this little piece of plastic, this tribal enrollment card that said that I get to be, that I am Native American. That was the only thing I had. So it's it's a very complicated, muddy place to be in.
Yeah, and you describe also just the complication of then knowing that the sort of enforcement of blood quantum, or the insistence on blood quantum, was also a stratagem to try to narrow the number of people who can claim any tribe.
Oh yes, it started, that was not a practice prior to colonization, that the idea of blood quantum wasn't something that, it's not a native idea. It is an idea that was sort of put on to say, like, you have to be this much, it's to be considered Native American. And by doing that, that does sort of, that leads to that cultural eradication. That was sort of the goal, I think, for a lot of time of colonization. And so tribes now try to use it as preservation. It's this idea of taking that tool and trying to keep something. But I don't, it's complicated to say whether or not that should be the case.
Yeah, I feel like just in the book where what was so affecting to me was, there's all the sort of the political analysis about blood quantum, the historical realities of it, the, needs of it and stuff. But it's just when you were describing at the end of the book, the feeling of coming to the end of the line, or the feeling of extinction, the feeling of being, the top of the totem pole and nowhere else to go. Was so affecting. And yeah, just if you'll just talk a little just about that. My mom was just like, go read the book, because obviously go read the book, because this is what, this is how you describe it is so poetic. But just talk a little more about just that, being able to find what that feeling is and being able to find how to describe it.
Yeah, I think that it didn't really, it was something that I always sort of knew nebulously, in the way that, I knew that I was Native American. I also knew that if I had children, they wouldn't be, like, there was this idea, or that my nephews and niece, they're not, like this, it was this sort of nebulous. But knowing tribal enrollment numbers, like seeing at the time of the book, and I'm sure they fluctuated a little, but it's still that percentage is true, is that 500, I believe it's 542 are is how many tribal members we have, and over half of that at the time, 297, are 1/8. And so that's 297 members who some have children, and they are not, and those children are not considered tribal members. It's just seeing how many people are at the end of that line. And it's a feeling of, I describe it in the book as a feeling of dread, because seeing, that was part of the motivation, is I want to be able to have people remember that my tribe existed, in the case that at some point we don't, which is very real and possible with the numbers and the way that blood quantum is enforced.
You wanted to leave some evidence.
Exactly.
Yeah. And at the same time, though, then you juxtapose that feeling with, you immediately, either before, in the same chapter, right? You're talking about the big one, the catastrophe that's about to happen in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes.
when the fault line there, and here we're talking the geological fault line, not like the political fault line, but the actual, fault line is gonna, that part of the land is gonna fall into the ocean of a truly apocalyptic, like gone. Just how that juxtaposition is, right? Because it's like, in some ways it might be, well, no, just if that's such an intense juxtaposition.
Oh yeah. And that's the thing, is that, like, learning, it was this idea of learning about that, and learning and seeing those numbers, it all sort of, like, it fell into place for me, that, like, there, there's this inevitable end in some way, like you said, like, that disaster is coming, this is apocalyptic thing for the land, for the region. And then I see the same metaphorical apocalypse happening with tribal enrollment, and it's that, it's that same knowing of that can be terrifying, it's, and also I think that's why but also knowing of it helps people become prepared. Knowing about these things helps people. It's like, okay, what changes can be implemented if we, to curtail some of that damage in both places. You know, what laws can be changed in the tribe and what safety measures can be happen for the big one. The idea of like knowing is scary, but it helps, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, it's so interesting because the measures you take, like, it's one thing to be the measures that you take to stave off extinction, right? It feels so meager in the face of the fact of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
It's totally good. Do we get to see your dog?
The worst timing.
We all have dogs. I was going to bring mine in so she can bark at your dog and say hello. Yeah, just, I mean, I was going to say I don't want to dwell on this, but I actually do want to dwell on this because I think about this all the time. And it would just, and you're somebody who obviously is thinking about it in very concrete terms of what it is to be, you know, approaching the end of the line. And just, yeah, did your, like, in the course of writing this book, right, did your relationship to end times, did your relationship to like how you related to this change?
I think it did. I think that it was this idea of, you know, it switched very quickly from dread or worry or this, you know, this fear. I'm so sorry, she's getting removed. This fear of that to instead be a you know, again, it's the idea of like, okay, well, I have to leave evidence. You know, it's I have to make a space for people to, if we are gone, for people to remember. So it's moving to accepting and then trying to leave a mark, you know, like trying to do what I can to, if I can't, you can only, you know, if you can't avoid the inevitable, then what can you do for after? You know, what do you do when things happen afterward? And I think that's it shifted my perspective from, you know, it was not A to B and then like, okay, what happens at C then? You know, what's the next step? Because life goes on.
Yeah. Wait, but say more about that. The life goes on part, right? It's like, yeah, and
exactly. it's life goes on and I don't know. I think it drove home to me, you know, having all of those realizations drove home to me how important memory is and how important our stories are. Because that's how we know of the people. Sorry.
What are you doing? What is happening to your dog?
Yeah, she throws her toys. And so she threw her toy on our glass top table. That's what happened. She was trying to play. I'm so sorry. But the stories and memory become even more important because life goes on, because there will be people that come after. And so that all of that has to you have to know where you've come from, I think. And that's what I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. Did this book start as, I mean, did you think of it as I'm writing a memoir, or did you think of it as I'm writing something else?
I thought of it as it started mostly as I am writing my family's story, not necessarily my memoir. I never thought of it that way to start, but I wanted to write about the totem connections. That was, I think, the first thing I ever wrote about was connecting these women in my life to something more, to this idea of like a spiritual greater, you know, to something that a symbol for them.
Mhm.
And it evolved from there to so much more, but that was the heart of it.
Mhm. Mhm. And it sounds like you were almost like part of my memorializing is to give totems to each of my maternal line.
Yeah, absolutely. It was part of I found that people had, there are only so many stories of my great grandmother, and my grandmother doesn't like to talk about a lot of her stories. I learned about them from other people. And I wanted people that came after to have a connection to like an idea of who these people were. Connecting to that larger symbol was important for my memorialization. It was also important for my journey into a cultural connection.
Right. This seems like it would be an awesome place if you're willing to just read one of the stories, because it's in each of the sections. You tell a story of raven, hummingbird, salmon, raven.
Yeah.
Would you do that for pick one and tell us who it is and read that part?
Yeah, I will. I think I'll read The Legend of the Hummingbird.
Awesome.
So that starts the third section of the book. Every spring brings a special flower. This flower is fragrant and gentle, its petals adorned with colors that shimmer in sunlight. She is the most beautiful flower that anyone has ever seen, though she doesn't think that highly of herself. Everyone, people and animals, eagerly waited for this flower to bloom, bear and salmon included. They knew that, despite their differences, this flower meant that sunlight was about to stretch. This flower's presence meant that spring had arrived in all of its warmth and comfort. The flower brought joy because it was a messenger of sunshine and long days and new beginnings. Raven sees this. Raven has taken many forms, and in this legend, she is a champion of the Salish people and the creatures that surround them. She observes the joy that this flower brings each time it blooms. The problem lies in the stationary nature of flowers. They are rooted, held in place by form. Raven knows this and knows that this flower could do more for the world if it were free to move across the land. The next spring, Raven waits in the field for the flower to bloom. When the flower finally appears, she sits with her and asks her questions. What do you value most? Seeing others smile. What do you want? To spread the joy of sunshine. Would you like to be free? There is no pressure to change, just an earnest desire to help her reach her fullest potential. Raven lets the flower make her own decisions, happy to accept whatever answer she gives. The flower, quiet and barely daring to hope, gives a gentle yes. Magic engulfs this gentle flower. The shimmering petals, delicate and fragile, are covered in a swirl, and all the creatures that have gathered hold their breath, fearing that the flower is lost. There is no flower when the dust settles. In its place is the smallest bird in all of creation, no bigger than the palm of a man's hand. Her wings are the vibrant green of fresh spring grass. Her throat and belly are a deep red, the burning colors of the setting sun. Every feather shimmers in the sunlight, iridescent with the magic that made them. Her name is Hummingbird. Hummingbird fluffs her feathers with pride, but then shrinks again. She tells Raven she is unsure. She tells her that she has never been a bird and doesn't know what it's like to leave the ground. All she has ever known was being a flower. She is afraid. Raven tells her that she was always meant to fly. She's meant to fly like sunlight flickering through the trees, to remind people of the swift magic in the air around them. Her heart was always Hummingbird, even though she had only ever known the form of a flower. Hummingbird flies. She vibrates with joy. For the first time, she can feel a drumbeat in her that had always tried to be heard, fast and excited and alive. Now she could beat along with her own wings. Raven calls her over and gives her a task. She will be compelled to spend her life telling all the flowers how much joy they bring into the world and making each of them feel special and needed and important. She'll have to dance in the sunlight to remind people of the joy that the light brings and to make them pause and take in the beauty of the world, even when she will not be able to do so because there will be little time for her to rest. This was no challenge. Hummingbird would have done all that on her own now that she could fly.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's like, you know, when I read the other stories of each of Raven, Hummingbird, Salmon, Bear, one of the things that's so lovely is just they're all in each other's stories.
Yes.
Like the characters of all the, you know, this is they're all interacting, and their interaction is so important. What else should we know about where these stories come from, and how they're transmitted, and how they're structured? Any of that?
All of the legends, all of these came from stories that I learned about from Salish culture, and from, you know, the larger like Pacific Northwest. They're all based around legends that are true, that have been adapted for me to reflect my family a little bit. And that's why each of them is titled A Legend of the Hummingbird instead of The Legend. You know, it's not the only version. There are a million versions, and this one is the one that I've chosen to present.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it seems it's part of what keeps them alive, right?
Exactly.
Like you'd have Raven be she instead of he. You like, right? It's like you're invigorating them by doing that.
Exactly. Yeah. It's bringing life, you know, into these stories again, bringing them a new chance, a new reincarnation for people.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. You talk a lot about belonging in this book. Or more precisely, like you talk a lot about the feeling of not belonging. Yeah, how did your sense of belonging, both personally, whether you felt you belonged or not, and then also your sort of understanding and feeling, and your understanding of what it means to belong, I imagine must have changed a good bit from from when you started this to at this moment, to even after publication, to even write, like.
Oh yeah. I think it's always changing. I think the idea of the qualifications of belonging, and the groups I choose to belong to, I think all of that is constantly changing. When I started this journey, I talk about it a good bit, again, talking about not belonging, but not feeling native enough. You know, I felt like I wasn't enough of that community. I didn't belong enough. And the journey of writing this, and the journey of my life through this time, was realizing that I am, you know, like I am native enough because I know that I am native. You know, it's again that cultural identity of all the rules around it don't matter, because this has been who I am, and this has been a part of my identity since I was a child, and didn't even really have somebody telling me that it was. It's something that I felt. And so I think that the idea of belonging, the definition has changed, in that like my approval is enough for me. Because if I wait on everybody else to approve of me, then I'll just never feel anywhere.
And I wonder if it's even more powerful than that, in the sense that, like, it feels to me like what the book feels to it, because it's such a powerful book, right? Like that what you have done is you've not just gone from I belong to this tribe because I can say I belong to this tribe. You've almost gone to like, this tribe belongs to me. Not in some possessive way or anything, right? Not in some capitalist possessive way, but just like you've written it in a way that it just feels that, I mean, yeah, tell me if that resonates at all. It's just like.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that
level, right?
Yeah, these, you know, it's the idea of this tribe belongs to me in the way that, you know, like these stories belong to me. This history is mine, just as it is any other tribal member. Those are stories that we all own, I think. And I think that trying to keep somebody from them, like that is entitled to them in some way, is where the problem lies, of like other people feeling otherized or not enough. But yes, absolutely, I have come around to the idea of like this idea of my tribe is mine, in that like I know that I belong here, and I know that I can help.
Yeah. I want to just zero in on the bit about like I belong here. That there's the here bit too, right? It's like, I've heard some discussions just about what it means to be indigenous, to the possibility of becoming indigenous to a land by knowing that you belong to the land, that the here is the land. Your experience, I mean, you're sort of, you went to the geographic location, just and then left there, and am now living in Alabama, very far away from the land. Just say more about those decisions, and what impact that has had.
Yeah, I think that I didn't, after my undergraduate, after getting a bachelor's, I was a little untethered. I didn't know, that date was approaching, and my lease was actually up on the same day as my graduation. And so it was this idea of like a whole chapter ending, and I ended up deciding that I wanted to go live where my tribe was. I didn't have it's not like there was a job prospect taking me there. There wasn't, there was family and tribal connection. And I lived there for a year. And the connection that I made with with the family that was up there that I had never gotten to live around was amazing. Those are people that I still cherish very, very much. And I loved being in that land. When I think of the feeling of homesickness, it's the Pacific Northwest that comes. But all that said, I could feel that I wasn't done. There was something else to do. There's that the itch of wanting to go to the next place. And I applied for graduate schools, and I got accepted into the University of New Orleans, and I felt it. I was like, this is is the next step. So on some level, Washington's always home, but
yeah. I mean, if it's the place to which, if that's you write in there, my home is in Georgia, but I feel at home.
Yeah, my soul is at home here. Yes.
My soul is at home here. And what you just said is like, that's what I am homesick. That's the place for which I am homesick. Feels like, I mean, that's what it is. And maybe it's just like you had to go to New Orleans to be in that place where, the veil between the living and the dead is just so much thinner.
Absolutely.
Able to like, hear more and see more and feel more of getting this book written. Yeah,
absolutely. And then, when I left New Orleans in the pandemic, I ended up moving to Alabama, and I found, my parents are here, and I met my husband here. And it was, it's something that has come to mean, again, homesick. When I think of the feeling of homesickness, it is Washington, but it's also my home is with the people that I am with, I think, more than anything.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a specific word, homesick. I wish there was a better, like a whole, I mean, it's a beautiful word. It's the precise word, right? It's like that feeling of being homesick. My father's family in China has a town that we supposedly are like, this is our ancestral home. We can call back our ancestors for 3,000 years. And this is our ancestral home. And, I felt very, deep about that. It's like, oh, we have an ancestral home. It's so beautiful. We have an ancestral home. And it was like, I found myself being homesick for a place that I had no idea that, I've never been there. I still haven't ever been there. And I found out recently, my father was not even born there. He was like, because the war was going on. And so they were fleeing. And so he was not born in that town, but he still calls it his home, Yeah, it's like, you can't shake it, I guess.
Yeah, there's something to that. I think, ancestral homes, they resonate differently than homes do in the more traditional sense, I think. It's this idea of that is a place where again, the idea of belonging. Even when, I had to move on because I knew there was something else to do. And there were times where I felt like I wasn't Native enough because of my own feelings, even while I was there. But I've never, it still felt like home, even with all of those sort of like troubles and storms going on.
Yeah. How's your relationship with the land in Alabama where you are? Yeah,
I love it. I do love being like out, I like going, we've seen some, gone on some day trips to really beautiful places. It's very humid.
Well, the Pacific Northwest is pretty, I mean, it's steamy now with the heat, but
yeah, but it never gets, even if it's humid, it's never quite so humid and hot at the same time. But the land itself is beautiful. It's a very lovely place to be, I think.
Does it call to you at all? Do you feel any connection to that land?
I think I feel to the land a little, but I think it's more because of the memories I've made. One of the first trips I took with my husband was to Dismal's Canyon, which there you can see like bioluminescence in the canyon at night. And so like I think of that as is also a spiritual place for the tribes here when they had that land. And so I think that I think of places like that have these connections. But they are more tied to memory of people for me than the land itself.
Yeah. So there's a question there's a question here asking, when did the feeling of not feeling Native enough actually go away?
That's a hard one because I am so much more comfortable now in saying that I am Native and I am enough.
Well, you're stuck with it now.
Yeah, exactly. There's the book. But even with that, there's still days where it feels like, because people have said that, when people have told you that you aren't or that you're not enough, it's hard, that's a lot of work to do to overcome that. I think it went away when there's not like a set thing. It was just the realization that circling back to the idea of like, this tribe is mine. These stories are mine. Sort of that when I realized that I was reclaiming that internally, as well as saying, I could say all the things, but internally I also felt like these stories belong to me. This tribe is mine. I think that's when the idea of Native enough really settled in.
That's so interesting. The sort of, so now we must talk about Raven, because this is the part of that, who do these stories belong to? It's like, it's Raven's story. When did you know this was your totem? What does it mean? What is the story? The story of Raven is so beautiful. Can you do a version of it?
Sure. Like a shortened version of the story of Raven. Raven's most famous, Raven appears in a lot of stories, but the most famous one, and the one that I use, is of Raven stealing the sunlight. And so Raven is a lot of things, a cultural hero, and at times a sage, but at the very heart of that spirit is a trickster. And the way tricksters function in most stories is to advance the world forward in maybe an unexpected way. And so Raven, the story of Raven stealing the sunlight is that the world starts out in darkness. The world is there, but the light is not. And Raven sees light coming from a hut. And when they peer through the window, they see a man opening a box that contains this vivid light. And so Raven infiltrates, tricks their way into this home and steals the light for themselves. Sort of, again, a lot of trickery happens to steal this orb, and flies off into the world with it, illuminating the world, and is then chased by Eagle because now they can be seen. And so the first thing that happens is they drop it and catch it, but the orb splits in half, and that half splits again. And of those quarters, one quarter becomes the stars, shatters into dust and becomes the stars, and one quarter becomes the moon. And then the remaining half, Raven's still carrying, but the Eagle is still chasing. And so they fly as high up as they can into the sky and leave the orb there and fly down so that Eagle loses them in the light, and that becomes the sun. And so through this idea of wanting to have this item, this light for themselves, they illuminate the world and create the sun and moon and stars.
That's awesome. And just, obviously I then have to ask, right? It's like, I mean, so part of what I love about that story is just Raven's not like trying to be all a hero or anything. Like, he's not like, oh, I'm going to illuminate the world. He's just like, shiny thing. I want the shiny thing. I want, like there's something about that thing that I want. And it, on some level it must have been, I mean, I'm taking a guess and tell me how far off the mark I am, that you wanted the thing that's like writing this book. It's like you really wanted the thing. You wanted to be able to get it down.
Absolutely. I wanted the book. I wanted the stories. I think that for me, and that it's the idea of knowledge lost, of history being lost. And I wanted to have it, and I wanted it to be mine. I wanted to be able to have that record or that collection in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pursued it and got my shiny thing. Mm-hmm. And then it, it in turn sort of hopefully illuminates for everyone else as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the illumination, right? Because like you have some sense, like you as Ray, you've seen what the light can illuminate for you, like, mm-hmm. right? You've had to fight for it. You've had to, I don't know what is playing the role of Eagle here, the evil, I don't know. I'm always like, it's the publishing industry. It's the struggle comes in where they're trying to kill you, but then it like brings the thing into the world. So now there's sunlight. So now there's this amazing sunlight. What is being illuminated? What could be getting illuminated?
I think for me, my hope, my goal with all of that, what I want to be illuminated is conversations around ancestry. I think that's important. People taking note of where they've come from. I also think conversations around cultural identity, being, as the question asks, like, when do you not feel Native enough? There's a lot of people that ask themselves that question, and not just about indigeneity. It's also about, I think anybody that sort of sits between worlds asks themselves, when do I feel like I am part of either of them or both of them? And mm-hmm. so I hope that it illuminates this idea of cultural identity and starts these conversations about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I really, what I love about you doing the work of this book is like, Res ipsa loquitur, the thing speaks for itself. It's just like it's not like you just get to say, oh, I get to decide. One does not just get to decide, I am, Native enough, or I am whatever enough. I am whatever enough. They don't get to just make a declaration. But if you put the work in,
Yeah.
right? And there's very specific work that needs to be done. And it's like, you did the work, you've done the work. It's just part of the illumination might just be, yes, you can work towards it. You can, but it takes work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of work to be done. Even if it's somebody who doesn't want to enroll, who doesn't want to go through the external work, there's a lot of internal work that has to be done to really reclaim a cultural identity.
Say more about that internal work.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of internal work. There's, I talk about it a little, but I would come up with excuses about why I couldn't participate in tribal events, and it was because I had a fear of failure. To me, the idea of if I try to create a bead art and I fail at it and I am not good at it, then I am no longer Native. Like, that sounds so silly to say out loud, but that's what it felt like. It's like, if I try to participate in the canoe journey and I can't make it, I'm not enough. And they'll unenroll me. Like, not really, but that's what it feels like. It's like, I don't claim it anymore. And so a lot of internal work into overcoming that and accepting that, like, the skills I have do not define or dictate my cultural identity. I can try to work to improve them, to connect with my culture, but it doesn't. The internal work was learning that to get out of my own way, basically. And it's hard work.
Yeah. I think so. There's a question that I think you just answered. Let me just see if you want to, add anything to it. The question was, do you still deal with internalized racism, or has the whole ancestral process reclamation healed that?
That is, I feel about 80% healed. I think that I'm to a pretty good level. But there are going to be days where I don't feel enough, where I think, it's so funny how we, as people, sometimes compete with people for no reason. It's like, I see somebody in regalia and say, oh, they're no more Native than me. They know how to do these dances, or they know these songs, they're more Native than me. And it's like, that's not true, like having to step back. And so there's a lot of, there's still some internalized racism. And I think that that's something I'll be working on my whole life, because that's, the world is not always kind to undoing those learned things.
Yeah. I mean, it very adamantly stands in the way.
Yes.
It's there to trip you up. Yeah. Go forward. The idea, if one of the illuminations is, let's talk about ancestry, right? Because we don't have very much time left, but it's just, I want to get into this a little bit about ancestry. You, in the book, towards one of the last things in your book is this letter to your daughter, who you may or may not have.
Yes.
7 generations down. So your great granddaughter.
Yes.
And first of all, it's just a stunning ending to the book. It is just stunning and beautiful, and it puts such a it makes so real, because you've now introduced us to 4 generations, including yourself, right? It just makes so real the idea of 7 generations back, 7 generations forward. So I would just say, now, whenever somebody says 7 generations, I'm just going to be thinking of your 7 generations.
Thank you.
Yeah, because I haven't done the same kind of imagining of that. But there was a point when you were talking about your ancestors, and you wrote about my ancestor 7 generations back. So your maternal ancestor 7 generations back. And you wrote it as a singular, right? And I was just wondering if you had in your mind like one woman, or I think 7 generations back would be 32. If you were picturing one woman or you were picturing 32?
I think I was picturing one, because to me it was that portion is a letter to a person, like to this one, to this nebulous idea that unfortunately I don't know anything about. And so to me, it existed in the same space as somebody that doesn't exist yet 7 generations in the future, because there are no records. There is no, I don't know who that is for me. I don't know who, I can't picture any of them beyond the 4 generations back. And so I think that even though I know that person existed, I know that there's those 32 people existed. I didn't have, for me it was still crafting somebody out of what I imagine they might be.
Yeah. No, it's a beautiful, you did it so beautifully. And it just, it's, I think it's one of these things we can describe it, and I think people get it conceptually, but it really needs to be read. And, before I bring ER back on to let people know how they can get the book so they can actually read it, is there anything else that you want to just put out into the space?
I think the only thing I want to say is really just thank you to everybody that is reading it or has read it. And I'm so touched by the people that have said, that have connected with it, that feel seen, because that was the other goal of all of this, is to make people realize that you're not alone when you're in between worlds. There are a lot of other people that are in between there with you. And so having people connect to that has meant so much to me. Seeing the comments, of people telling me how much that means, or the work that they're doing, or how they feel, the same way, is so important, and it just makes my heart so happy.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And I can't wait to see how, what you do, what you're continuing to do to work your lineage forward.
Thank you.
Wonderful. ER, I think if you can come on and tell folks how they can get their hands on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love for folks to click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen to buy Thinning Blood from Charis. It really does help us when you buy event books from us. So just click that button. It's one easy click. And I also dropped the link in the chat to buy Kung Lee's books. So again, even though it's fiction, Kung Lee, do you want to give us like the 2-sentence summary of your book so folks know why I think it makes sense?
So the book is about what should have happened in 1794 if on this land the resistance, the Haitian Revolution had come into this land, and the Black revolutionaries and indigenous resistance had joined forces and actually stopped the United States. So
if it would do your heart good to have some alternative history of our world, which it should, I think. Read this book as a companion to Leah's book, but definitely click this teal button to buy Thinning Blood tonight. Thanks to everybody watching with us. Another way you can help if you don't have the money to buy a book tonight is to request it from your local public library. That really does help an author. That's important. Tell folks who who might enjoy the book to read it. Make a great book club selection. So if you are a member of a faith community or an alumni organization or anything like that does book clubs, nominate this book. It really does help. So Leah, I wish you all the best, and I hope the rest of your book tour is really fun and that you get to enjoy it and feel feted and celebrated. And we're so honored that you chose to come to Charis virtually for this part of your tour. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thank you.